29.
But she's, yeah, I remember her telling me one
It's right
time
there,
that
Joe.
They're used to, I thought she said maybe in Nashville.
Nashville was at 141 in Manchester.
Manchester,
Out here?
or the Office Depot.
Yeah, I remember that.
Almost over. I got a pack for you here.
Okay.
But,
So I got
yeah, I
disrupted
thought,
everything.
I
Sorry.
know she said there was a grocery store across from where Gearberg's living, but I thought she said that was maybe a national.
I thought I remembered it being in Kroger's, but maybe I was wrong.
This is Greg
We're
County.
ready?
Everybody that confirmed
Is
that
here?
it has arrived.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming tonight and being interested in learning some more about historic preservation. The agenda, as I said, we will be talking about historic preservation, the codes, the City of Wildwood's Register and the National Register, and then the landmark preservation special area considerations. You want to take the minutes, or the agenda? I'll get it right, or the roll. Get it right in a minute.
Commissioner Helfrey,
Here.
Commissioner Levitt,
Here.
Commissioner Cohen, Commissioner Gargnani,
Here.
Commissioner Beatty. Here. Commissioner Duffler.
Here.
Commissioner Simpson.
Here.
Chair Lee, Councilmember Worther, Mayor Bowman.
Okay. Mr. Gunich, we'll turn the meeting over to you.
Thank you. As Vice Chair Gragnani just mentioned, Mr. Newberry and I would also like to thank you for your attendance tonight. Just some background, maybe all of you recall, if not, our former chair, Rick Archeski, at the end of last year or the beginning of this year, noted that we have fifth Mondays on occasion, and those typically aren't scheduled. And the thought was is that we take advantage of those fifth Mondays and do kind of a little intensive workshop on the land use codes and the plans that the city has, and get a better understanding of how they originated, how they've changed over time as the city's grown and trends have all been altered, etc. And then finally answer any questions and respond to your comments. I think this is the fourth one?
Yes.
Fourth one this year, so it's an odd year, a lot of fifth Mondays this year, it seems to me. And Mr. Newberry and I decided that we maybe break from the regulation side of things and maybe talk about something that a lot of people have an interest in, and seems to be a happier subject sometimes than making land use decisions that impact properties for decades and decades and decades and people right away. So tonight we decided to look at our historic preservation and restoration code, and accompanying that, something called the landmark and preservation area, which is almost like an overlay district if you wanted to kind of reference something that's close to it. In preparation for tonight's discussion, Mr. Newberry and I pulled together a couple of pieces of the information that we thought would be beneficial to you. First, the chapter that is the Historic Preservation and Restoration Code. And that was updated extensively in 2014, at the time that Bill Kennedy was the chair of that commission. There had gone kind of incremental changes before that, but since 1999, when it was first adopted till 2014, there hadn't been a good house cleaning, so to speak. And we were able to accomplish that. Received a lot of public input over the course of time, contacted every property owner that was on our survey and asked them to comment. So we felt like we had a good basis when we finally presented the Historic Preservation Commission's recommendation to Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council. And the other item that was in your packet is that letter of recommendation that the Historic the Historic Preservation Commission gave to the Planning and Zoning Commission before it was forwarded on to City Council. So kind of show you that linkage that you, as the Planning and Zoning Commission, have between the Historic Preservation Commission and City Council. Also, we thought we'd maybe liven up the room a little and show you some of the banners that the Historic Preservation Commission has been working on over the course of the last year and a half, almost 2 years. We have a total of 12 of these now. We only put out a few, kind of give you an idea. 2 kind of link into what we'll be presenting tonight, the National Registry, the local registry, and then of course the city's Old Pond School. And a major endeavor of the Historic Preservation Commission and the Economic Development Committee of City Council right now is Route 66. We've been talking a lot about that. We participated in an event with the Big Chief Roadhouse back in September. Ms. Gragnani was there. And then finally, our historic communities. We have 11, 10 of which have a very nice bronze sign that gives a brief history of the historic community. Number 11 is Orville, and we're waiting for the road and bridge project to be completed by the city there, so we'll have room to place the final of the historic community markers in a safe location. So that's the information we have. And I was going to start with the code itself. And as with any of our workshops, I say something you think's wrong, it probably is. I was at the barbecue bash all weekend, so I'll attest to that. Did not have anything to drink, but it's been a long weekend. And if you have any comments too, please. That's what we're here for, to kind of answer them. So just a couple things about the Historic Preservation Commission. Surprisingly, next to City Council, it is the largest group that constitutes a commission, board, or standing committee, so to speak, of the city of Wildwood. There's 11 people. There's 7 residents, 2 city council liaisons, and then 2 liaisons from other commissions and boards. One being Ms. Gragnani, who represents the Planning and Zoning Commission, and the other, the Architectural Review Board. Linkages, well, obviously, City Council is a key component in any of the boards and commissions' actions over time. And Planning and Zoning Commission and Architectural Review Board do interact on certain proposals for redevelopment or, in some instances, changes, and certainly land use. So there's a real linkage there, and that's why there's that number of liaisons, and for the most part, the size of the commission itself. 7 members is less, obviously, than the Planning and Zoning Commission from residents' perspective, one shy of filling all 8 wards. We started with a much smaller group at one time, but we also found we had difficulty getting people there when we were a group of 5. And oftentimes we would have meetings with no quorum, and it certainly became a frustration, particularly when something was of pressing nature. And so, as I say, over time we've kind of expanded that size, added alternates, and so we have a lively group when we do have meetings these days. So, kind of interesting. So, they, like the Planning and Zoning Commission, serve terms, or alternating terms, meaning that originally when the board was formed, commission was formed, there was a group that were 3 years, there was a group that was 2 years, and then there was a group that was 1 year, and they've all been reappointed many, many, many times, and so there's always somebody coming and going. But what we find is many of our members like to stay once they're on, particularly if they found that this is really something they enjoy and like doing. So that's something about them. As I mentioned, Ms. Gragnani is the liaison from the Planning and Zoning Commission on the Historic Preservation Commission, and certainly can add to anything I say tonight as well. Mr. Newberry got his first taste of the Historic Preservation Commission last Thursday night. We were double booked on meetings, so he took Historic Preservation Commission with Kathy Arnett, our assistant director, and I was over with the watershed folks looking at erosion problems. So, but it's a fun group, like the Planning and Zoning Commission, and I think they do a lot of good things like you all do. So I want to kind of get into a couple of key components about the Historic Preservation and Restoration Code. First and foremost, it is voluntary to place a property on the local register. We do not have a mandatory requirement, and that's intentional. So kind of take yourself back to shortly after the incorporation. A lot of people in Wildwood had the feeling that the group that was proceeding forward with the implementation of rules, regulations, and laws, that there was just so many of them. And every component of developing the land, grading the property, putting up signs, taking down signs, doing this, doing that, was now governed by a set of new rules, requirements, or regulations. And so in that backdrop, when the Advisory Historic Preservation Commission was established by City Council, the charge to them was, let's not add another layer of regulation. The assumption being, I guess, is that historic preservation and restoration should be fun, and it should be a partnership, not a set of legal requirements. So it's voluntary, which in some regards makes the 12 properties we have on our register seem pretty impressive in some regards. Because here's why. If it's a voluntary set of regulations, that person, or persons, are basically agreeing to allow the city to step in and participate in some of the decisions. And that's unusual. Not a lot of people like that. A lot of people like less regulation, but in this case, other than the city's Old Town School, we have 11 property owners that have said, sure, we think that's a reasonable approach. Not all of them, by the way, have received incentives. And that's the next thing I want to cover. So when you look at the Wildwood Local Registry, you'll see that many of them are single-family dwellings, or in some instances, log cabins that have been saved and restored. But there are a few that actually have some type of commercial use or sought commercial use, like the Kern service station, which was 24-hour heating and cooling. The second John E. Schnarr House, which is now Butler Securities. Stovall's Grove. Andrew J. Kern House, which is higher focus photography. Hinken Place, which is the Wildwood Historical Society's headquarters. So as you can see, some of the properties were either commercially zoned or were being used for commercial purposes with residential zoning, typically non-urban resident district. And so in those instances, there was a need to rezone or to alter an existing zoning, and the city was able to memorialize the requirements for historic preservation and restoration in those ordinances, and in many instances offer incentives to create that stronger partnership, so to speak. In the case of like the Kern service station, certain road improvement requirements were far gone, and no traffic generation assessment fee was collected. In the case of John E. Schnarr, again, no traffic generation assessment fee was collected, and in principle, the roadway improvements were waived, but it's on this final phase of the streetscape. Yes, sir.
On the current service station, does anything follow it? Because I see that property's for sale now.
Yes, the registry designation runs with the land, so to speak. And if incentives were granted, if someone were not to maintain it, then we would argue you are responsible to reimburse the city. How we would do that? We would say that the ordinance in place doesn't match what you're doing, and so you have to amend it. And as we amend it, we would eliminate the incentives, and the requirements would be reapplied. Good question, thank you. And Stonewall's Grove, it was there, we didn't give them incentives. Hinkin Place, again, they received a conditional use permit, so they do not have traffic generation assessment fees. But we did allow gravel parking in lieu of paved surface. We gave them some liberties with signage and how it was placed. So again, in many instances, what the city tries to do in cases of local register, if it's a residential property, we really don't have much to offer. If it's a commercial property, we do our best to give them incentives to encourage them for the consideration. And with the commercial property, we have that opportunity then to memorialize that partnership more so than in a residential setting in the governing site-specific ordinance. So 2 key points. First, it's voluntary, and secondly, we offer incentives in certain instances to encourage it. The reason incentives is offered is what we were told and are still told to this day, is that historic restorations, historic reuses of existing buildings and structures is always more expensive than a new build. And I think we found that out with Old Pond School. We have firsthand experience. It's not that we would have ever demoed it and built a one-room schoolhouse, but at the end of the day, the city ultimately spent almost $1 million on the restoration, all of which was worked through a citizen-based committee, many of whom went to school there, like Red Kelp, David Schneider, Jerry Stricker. But it is just an expensive process, because particularly when you're trying to do similar materials, similar styles, similar design elements. For example, we bought glass that was historic in nature, that had come from another one-room schoolhouse to fill in the paintings that had been damaged over the years. More costly, less energy efficient. So on a cold night, if you're in Old Pond School, you'll know it. You don't need a thermometer to tell you it's cold outside, but there's a funny story. We had a consultant in from Boulder, Colorado that was helping us on our first Parks Action Plan. And we were meeting down at Old Pond School with a group of volunteers, citizen volunteers. Kept her coat on the whole night. Finally someone said, "Are you cold?" She said, "I haven't been this cold in Colorado since I moved there." And she was inside Old Pond School. We had the heat on, I promise you, but it was a chilly night. So, again, not to beat a dead horse, so to speak, we have a voluntary ordinance, but what we do to encourage participation is offer incentives. And I probably skipped one of the more important ones. There is a house, River Craig, that sits, it's located off of Route 109, but it sits atop the bluff looking down into the Merrimack River Valley. And ultimately, what the Historic Preservation Commission recommended and City Council concurred, there was a developer that wanted to demo the house because it was on 12 acres, plat 4 new lots and build new. He needed variances to the lot widths to accommodate for homes because the tract of land was oddly shaped. The city wouldn't grant those variances unless he saved the house. And so it's not the best example because there's a house that sits, River Craig sits here, so to speak, on the bluff, and there's a house perched in between there and the bluff. But the house was saved. The person that bought it from the developer actually restored it. He was an architect, his wife and him did the restoration. And the people that live there now they're committed to it as much as anyone that I've met in terms of protecting a historic asset of that magnitude. So we've done a lot over the years. Yes, ma'am?
So the house that you just talked about, is it on the local registry? No.
No.
So they restored it on their own, but they chose not to put it on the registry.
And as I say, we denied the variances initially, and then there was talk about moving the home. And ultimately, once we got a plat that was indicative, and what we did is we put in the plat language about preserving the home. So we didn't necessarily, we couldn't get him over the hump to get him to put it on the local registry, because his point was, I'm trying to sell this property. If it's on the registry, I may not be able to sell it, because people have many more questions than just, you have to keep the house. So I guess we felt that we'd gone far enough. But during that period, we were able to go down and take a tour of it. There's a widow's walk up on the 3rd floor. It's a pretty impressive place.
You can actually see the arch. You get up on the widow's walk.
So that's a big white house.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was for sale, wasn't it, a couple years ago?
Yeah.
Waddell's.
Yeah. Yeah, it was Mrs.
Lisa's.
Bird.
Lisa's, yeah, Lisa's
Yeah.
mom. Yeah, okay. All right.
But yeah, it's just, like I say, it's supposedly haunted too, if you believe that.
What street is this on?
Persimmon, I believe.
Yeah, I believe so.
Beautiful house.
Yeah. So, as you can see, the local registry, I think we've done pretty well. The banner does not include our most recent addition, and that's the Mary Cliff residence at the Mariners Retreat Facility on Route 109. That just happened this year. Sprague County participated in that process. We got a great tour of the facility. I mean, I'm not pushing this Gragnani out, but if you like to go into old places and get access where you normally can't and see it at its inception sometimes, it's fun to be on the commission.
Have you guys, why is LaSalle? I'm surprised they're, I'm shocked that LaSalle's not on there.
Well, I can give you what I think the reason is.
Because it's haunted?
It doesn't seem to matter.
So the Christian Brothers own LaSalle Institute, and they have a local person that is the director of the facility. Now it's Michelle Cook. It used to be Mike Sawicki, who was there for years and years. Christian Brothers, I think at one time I was told the average age of one of the brothers is around 75, 80. And they're an order that is slowly but surely contracting and not growing. And there's a lot of cost with the brothers who have retired and are in need of health care. And so they've always seen that property as a potential source of revenue for the future. And they've always told Brother Marvin, who used to be down there, and then Mike Sawicki, as long as it breaks even, we'll stick with you, as long as it's not costing us money. And so they too just see another layer of regulation on it as something that may hinder a sale when they need to make that sale for reasons, well beyond what we could say are unreasonable or reasonable or somewhere in between. So yeah, they're not on. When Mike Sawicki was down there, I used to ask him about it occasionally, and the brothers are up in, I think, Rochester, Minnesota, and he's like, it's a tough sell.
How big is that property?
Over 200 acres.
They have a cemetery on it, and
Yeah, it's beautiful.
It's
Yeah,
scary,
you
so I'll
can
get
go
it on
up
the
behind it.
inside.
And there's a grotto up there too.
Yeah.
So it's really nice.
It's a very special place, and Miss Michelle Cook, she'll be glad you just go up to the office and tell them who you are. They'll be glad to let you wander around on the property to your heart's content. They're having their Oktoberfest this Sunday there. If you have a spare hour, you might go down, participate, introduce yourself, and you can walk around. Weather's supposed to be better than this past Sunday in terms of temperature, so it might be a good time to do it. So, with any register or registry, there's always a process. And that process is spelled out in the regulations. I think key among it is that there's a public hearing, as we do with anything. The difference is our Historic Preservation and Restoration Commission does a little pre-hearing where they invite the applicant to come and basically ask the applicant, do you have any concerns? Is there anything we can say to allay your fears? Or we respond back, you've given us some information, we'd like to know about this. Why is it this way? So there's a lot of like fact-finding before we go to the public hearing, because the intent of that pre-hearing in terms of the commission is to go with as about a complete package as possible to the public. Because the first fear is always, it's either going to be demolished and something new is coming, or what are they doing to this great asset? Are they going to cut it up, put something on front, behind, to the side? So there's a lot of concern when we do post some of these. So we try to have the best package. I like to think we do a good job because oftentimes our public hearings, there's not a whole lot of people there. And I think we do, I think some of that can be attributed to, we provide a pretty solid package on our website about the hearing and what's going to be discussed and the aspects of it. So public hearing, planning department writes a recommendation after the public hearing. This should sound familiar. That recommendation is acted upon by the Historic Preservation Commission, and then the applicant has time to review it, because there are a set of conditions associated with it, and those conditions come directly from the ordinance about the certificate of appropriateness. What that is anytime there's an alteration to the exterior of the building involving roof, gutters, downspouts, windows, doors, paint color, siding, trim, the Historic Preservation Commission has a right and a requirement to issue a certificate of appropriateness before that work is completed. So in that recommendation, it talks about the items that the commission will review and will not review. Generally, nothing in the interior of the asset, whether it's a structure, building, etc. So they vote on it, then it goes to City Council. City Council holds a public hearing, and then legislation is authorized. And the legislation is usually where the incentives come into play, because only the City Council can grant waivers to traffic generation assessment fees, certain road requirements, etc. So thereafter, the ordinance is signed, sent to the property owner, and the property, whether it's a building or structure, is then placed on the register, and then a nice plaque is provided to them, of which you cannot see on any of these, but yeah, there it is
One
right
there.
here. It's a small bronze plaque, has the date of its initial construction, the name of the historic property, like the second John E. Schnarr house, and like I say, we think it's a nice plaque. We should
Of
all
course,
be-
I
I
have
can't remember where it is. That wood one isn't ours. No. And here's, we put ours. So,
So I've got a question.
Sure.
Since it is a voluntary action by the property owner, at some point, they want to make some change to it, and it is not approved by the city council or whoever, can they just remove themselves from? Okay.
yeah. Now, the only caveat to that is if there is a set of incentives. And the way it's the way the governing ordinance is written in most instances, there is a requirement to, basically, if you got a TGA waiver, traffic generation assessment fee, then you have to pay that at some point. So we've never had to do that. Fortunately, that's a good thing because it's always hard to be retroactive in nature. And that's the risk we took. But the overwhelming sentiment at the time was, if we have a voluntary ordinance and we don't have something to kind of sweeten the pie,
Sorry.
then we're probably not going to have a whole lot of applications for it. But yes, it runs with the land, and there is an obligation if you receive incentives to compensate the city back if it is removed from the registry. So, I touched on the certificate of appropriateness. It's a review process, so let's say the city were to decide, well, Old Pond School needs to be pink, not that beige color. So the Department of Planning would submit an application to the Historic Preservation Commission, saying we want to change the color of Old Pond School from this kind of beige tan color to pink, and I would like a certificate of appropriateness to proceed forward. The commission would review such, make a determination. But they'd say no. But, so these are the local registry, and Travis gave you a little, if you don't mind. So higher focus, so the original, and this is interesting too. So all of these, even if this wasn't historic, the addition to a residential structure would have gone through architectural review. And there's two schools of thought out there. One is if you're building something new, make it look new. I think the best example is the Art Museum in Forest Park. You have this 1904 World's Fair structure, and now you have this ultra-modern addition to it. So that's one school of thought. The other is you try to not necessarily match it, but do design cues from the old that basically kind of integrates the new. Higher focus, on Pond Road, the Grays own the property and operate the business. So, then the Kern gas station, service station, excuse me, used to be 24-hour heating and cooling. It's been vacant. Some of the color selection, particularly the yellow over there, that was a point of discussion between the property owners and the city. And one thing too, we look at very closely is signage. And in instances where it's a historic structure or building, we try our best to find something that adds to that character, not detracts. So in this case, they wanted a more traditional sign, and we asked them to consider a post and arm and something that was more reminiscent of what you might see at a gas station back in, let's say, a heyday of Route 66. And this is on Route 66. So, the Coinco School Post Office, so originally a one-room schoolhouse. It's my understanding the school, one room was in the basement. That's also where the Coinco Post Office was for many years. You all probably know it better than I. Joe Wyman, who was Treeland Nursery, owned it at the time we placed it on the register. The new owners aren't as enthusiastic about it as Joe Wyman was, who passed several years ago. Jaeger Farm Log Cabin. This is located off of Austin-Fort Road near the intersection of Hart Road. It's on a very large tract of land, and it's way off the public street. So it's on the register, but no one really can get to it. This is the mayor's cabin on his property, Mayor Bolton. And he did note that if you'd like to come out and see it in person, he'd be glad to accommodate us to come on out and do a site visit. Annie Rickard, this is the property Mr. Beatty asked about, excuse me. And this is right across from the Grover Post Office, again on Manchester Road. The register was done in conjunction with a zoning request. A lady wanted to open a kind of specialty plant nursery with sales room. Would have been a wonderful use for the property. But she needed incentives to road improvements and traffic generation assessment fee, which the city did grant. But she could never work out a price with the property owner and close the sale. We all know Snowball's Grove. Dennis Elsie and his wife own it. The dance hall, quite a place. It is a landmark there, that's for sure. And then just to the west of it is the Hinkett Place, Damn Horse Toy Factory. This is now the headquarters of the Wildwood Historical Society. They have the chicken coop, a couple of barns. This is the caretaker's residence. It's the Hinkett House, so a lot of history in that little stretch of Route 100 on Manchester Road.
Where does that rank in the age of buildings in the city?
I've always been told, and there's always debate because,
Yeah.
you know, but the original City Hall may have been one of the oldest buildings in Wildwood.
Oh,
It was
okay.
like 1840 something.
Uh-huh.
A lot of the log cabins, they're hard to date. So this is one of the older structures for sure.
Yeah, I saw it was the oldest of the ones you have listed.
Good observation. Old Pond School, if you don't have a chance, go on up and take a look. The grass is cut. It's like, why do we take that picture? You know, it's been an interesting, you know, a lot of people use it. A lot of subdivisions have their meetings, their annual meetings there. Smaller subdivisions, mainly the large lot, single family type. Pond Athletic Association meets there monthly. When we had the second flood down on the Merrimack River in Coinco, the church met there for the better part of 7 months on Wednesdays and Sundays. And it was the cleanest the building's ever been inside and the most cared for. So we miss them at times, but we do our best. Restoration was completed in 2006, so the city's had it for 13 plus years. And many of you may have noticed we just did some major repairs to the retaining wall or stone wall out along Manchester Road. That was built by the WPA back during the Great Depression under Franklin D. Roosevelt's Works Program. So a lot of history there.
Is there a charge to use it?
Well, we do a deposit for residents of $50,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll check it out after you're completed, and if you've left it in good shape, we return your $50. So,
Interesting.
I need to keep that in mind.
Yeah, it's nice.
please, if you have something that's, the only hindrance here is, you know, kind of the elegance of the building is part and parcel to the lawn area out in front, and you can kind of see it from the road just above the wall. So when we were doing the restoration, there was a lot of discussion about needing additional parking. We only have 13 spaces. So we ended up just keeping the 13 spaces, which means if you have a large group, it can be a challenge.
Now, our subdivision, we used to go to Rockwood Bank, and
Oh, yeah, they have that.
they were charging us 25 for a while, but then they wanted to up it to 50, and so following that, the next year, we just had our annual meeting on the common ground on the street.
Well, for some of you, it's just a short walk, so I would
Right.
encourage you to consider it. It's
Yeah.
available for just that.
Mhm.
We hope people use it for it.
Okay.
Ben Baumer House on Clayton Road. It says Clayton Woods Court, but Clayton Woods Court is a new street that actually touches the rear of their property. Can't tell you why it's addressed there. You'll have to ask smarter people than me. But you see it from Clayton Road. And this was just a young couple that thought it'd be great to try. So we were like, great. This is now Butler Security. It doesn't, it looks like that, but it looks magnificent if you haven't seen it. And the cottage, the Dinkies purchased this from Dick Dalton. His father resides there now. They wanted to do some type of coffee shop, tea room. It's already zoned commercial. It's from 1965. It's C2 shopping district. They purchased property across the street. This is Etherton Road, just north of Manchester Road. So they've got several properties there now, and just kind of waiting to see what they want to do. And then Mary Cliff, which is our most recent. This was actually built, I hope I get this right, correct me, Ms. Young. One of the wealthy industrialists out of the city of St. Louis.
Yeah, I don't remember their name.
And drawing the blank as well. But just a wonderful structure, and it's going through a major interior renovation. Because it is a retreat area, but like a lot of things, what people used to accept as retreats in terms of sharing bathrooms and having two people sleeping together and things like that, a lot of people don't like that these days, so they're trying to catch up with the times. But John Gunther, who was integral in the incorporation of the city, was on our architectural review board for the better part of a decade plus. He's doing the work, and real confident it'll turn out great. So, we have our local register. There's also several properties in Wildwood, 6 to be exact, that are on the National Register of Historic Places that is maintained by the National Park Service, which is part of the Department of Interior with the federal government. And Babler State Park is one. Many of the buildings and structures in that park were built by either the CCC or the WPA, again during the Great Depression. Just wonderful work. And I mean, that just defines a whole architectural style and period of time and magnificence that you just can't find. I guess people still build that way, but I don't see it.
So has Babler been in a state park since the 30s?
Okay. It was donated by Edmund Babler. There is a crazy provision in the legal documents. And we found this out early on, that it said if ever there was a city that became, when Babler Park became part of a city, and the state no longer maintained the property, it would transfer to the city if they should choose to accept it.
Interesting.
Yes. So I'm confident that whether the state or the city, it will always be a great place to call them one of the fine jewels of the St. Louis region. Next is the Ball Essen Farmstead. Lauren Strutman, who's an architect that does historic restorations, did a restoration here in a building addition. Just a wonderful place. There's a spring-fed pond on the property. There's watercress that grows there naturally. It's on Route BA of Babler Park Drive. It's very different looking than this, but you can still see this building as
Is-
part of it.
Is that the one that has a separate kitchen building in the front and they use it as a game room?
Yep, exactly.
That was on a house tour, wasn't it?
Yep.
Years ago. yeah.
Sure was.
It's beautiful.
Is that the ball from Baldwin? Okay.
Yep, sure is. And the Essen as well. And, you know, the Essens are the folks that, we have the Essen cabin that was donated to us by the Karst family. The wife in the Karst, Mr. and Mrs. Karst, she was an Essen. The Big Chief, this was done, the registry was done by Todd Bill, one of the owners, early owners of the facility, about the same time, late 80s, early 90s. And like I say, It is on Route 66. It's a remnant of its heyday. There used to be little hotel rooms or motel rooms in the back, like a motor court, and a restaurant and gas station. It was kind of one-stop shopping there. Stephanie Mulholland leases the building from an owner of the property, and she's celebrated her 9th anniversary. So, been successful. Cry Camp Store, Lynn Martin used to own this. Lynn Martin was the president of the Wildwood Historical Society and the chair of our Wildwood Historic Preservation Commission for many years. Cry Camp Store, Ron James, who used to be on our city council, he passed rather suddenly several years ago. He used to talk about going there to vote. You get your mail there, it was the post office, and you buy your food stuff. So not that many years ago, it was still an active store. And then the Old Pond School. We're on the local register, but we also are on the national register.
Joe, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Why would you, if you had a property that was on the national register, why would you not have it also on the local?
You're not required, it's a kind of quirky thing. Like when Todd and Bill wanted to place the Big Chief Dakota Grill, now the Big Chief Roadhouse, on the national register, I had to write a letter in support saying the city did support it. The Historic Preservation Commission authorized the department to prepare the letter. And when Ball Lesson was added, I wrote a letter in support. When the Orville Historic District was added, I wrote a letter in support. And I always ask, don't you want to be on the local register? And they're like, no. And primarily they do it for certain tax purposes. And we have no property tax, so we can't reduce a property tax. We don't have any assessments that we apply to it that we could reduce. So a lot of people do it for tax purposes. And I wouldn't want to diminish their desire to save a historic asset. But we just don't. We have incentives, but there are always incentives that require you to basically either be wanting to rezone the property or change a condition in the ordinance that governs the property or subdivide it or something. And then there's the Orville Historic District, again, another Warren Strutman project. There's actually, there were 3 houses that were part of the district. All 3 now have separate owners. Warren Strutman was the owner of all 3 when the register request was submitted and accepted by the Department of Interior and National Park Service. This is on that stretch of Edgerton Road between Route 109 and Wild Horse Creek Road. There's not a good place to pull over and kind of take a look, but you drive by and slow down. It is neat, the collection of buildings. And that's one of the things. We have a lot of just specific sites other than Westland Acres, which isn't shown. Westland Acres is the city's only district, and that was done as part of the rezoning request. So the Planning and Zoning Commission was very much involved in that. But the entirety of the Westland Acres community that's in the city of Wildwood is a historic district. And the incentive we offered is, instead of 3-acre density, we allowed a 1-acre density, which is consistent with the Wild Horse subdivision, the Highlands and Wild Horse and all the surrounding properties. And I believe that's it.
So the Orville, is it those 3 homes on the east side?
Exactly.
And the abandoned one on the west just
Is not. And that's getting to the point where I don't think that's salvageable. You know, there's always, and this is something we debate a lot, and Ms. Dragnani can attest to this, at Historic Preservation Commission meetings, you know, there's demolition by neglect, and so people don't maintain them, and over the years, they'll deteriorate to the point where they're not restorable, right, and then they come in for a demolition. And the department was criticized at times for not being more proactive. And the problem we always faced is, when I would talk to owners of those types of properties, they would say, okay, I'll get the demolition permit. I'm like, no, I don't want you to do that. And it's like, well, I need time. I'm trying to figure out what the best use is, where I might get funding, things like that. So we kind of go around and around and around. And one of the greatest losses the city had was the Old Pond Hotel, which was on that southwest corner of Manchester Road and Pond Road, or Christie Road. It was to be a microbrewery. The gentleman that owned the property, and still owns the property, was going to convert the hotel and add on to it. There was an issue with wastewater treatment. There's no public sewer, so it stalled and never started. And over time, it deteriorated. And I talked to the gentleman, and he said he was hopeful that it would be this year or next year. The years added up.
The other thing that I thought was a shame is that barn, that was up there on the hill.
Valley Crossing, yeah.
Yeah, down here.
That was such a cool barn, and you could just see it sagging and sagging through the years. And it's like, oh,
Yeah,
see that.
we did a demolition site visit there, and, it was, and I'm not saying this is bad or good. It was a person that owned the property that didn't reside on the property. It was a rental property, and they had it on the market. They wanted to sell it for commercial purposes. And again, it's just how little do you push, or how hard do you push? And sometimes, on occasion, I'd say we're a little more successful than others, but yeah, we've lost some real treasures over the years. It's kind of sad. So local, national. So the city is blessed with some of the real gems being on the National Registry. And then there's ours, which I feel as strongly about as if they were on the National Registry. So that's a lot of what the Historic Preservation Commission does. It implements its code and its regulations to encourage historic preservation. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts aspect. They also, their charge also includes providing advice, or being that conduit between a property owner and other agencies that are affiliated with historic preservation and restoration causes. And that typically falls on city staff, since we have the time, not necessarily the expertise, but we're always glad to make calls to the State Historic Preservation Office, and that's really the best resource. They're the conduit to the federal government. They manage the programs for the federal government in this regard, and they are always willing to help. So if you have questions, you can either ask us, and we don't have the answers, we're glad to go to the state, or you can call the state directly. There's just nice people up there that are glad to work with us at any time. And then finally, one of the main charges, and this is something we spent probably 3 or 4 years accomplishing, any property that is over 75 years of age, that meaning a building or a structure, has to have a survey. And so that's called our historic inventory. And we engaged a firm to assist us with that, and we completed it in 2017, I think it was. And we have over 350 properties in our inventory. We have this book, we updated it in 2018. We've been too busy in 2019, but we'll probably, I think the consensus was amongst the Historic Preservation Commission members that we would do it on a 2-year basis or something, because we're only adding maybe 20 or 25 properties per year, it seems.
Until we get to the subdivisions.
Yeah, then we're gonna have to rethink it. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. Well, I'll be part of history by then, I think, so I won't have to worry about that. Maybe Mr. Newberry will have to tackle that challenge.
Is that book available electronically online?
It's online.
It's part of the
It's on
package.
Yeah, it's
In
on
the
the packet.
agenda, yeah.
Yeah, so,
It's supposed to be
it's
about- this is
the lady that did,
this is-
Lynn Jocelyn, with the Missouri Preservation Office.
Sounds right.
She did a great job. I mean, she did a lot of it from the street, but she also met with a lot of people. We had several ice cream socials where we invited all the people that were surveyed to come in and kind of add anything they wanted to the forms. We had root beer floats, if you're wondering. So they were pretty fun. We usually get about 30 or 35 people to show up, and always enjoy it. So, the last thing I wanted to cover, and that's the landmark and preservation area. And this is really in the purview of the Planning and Zoning Commission. You depend on the Historic Preservation Commission to provide you input, information, and a recommendation, but ultimately, the Planning and Zoning Commission makes the final recommendation to City Council. So what is it? Well, it's an overlay, so to speak. So the zoning stays in place of the property, but an LPA is added to it. How many have we done? 1. How many have been applied for? 2. Can't tell you necessarily why. 1 was in the Orville Historic District. A lady had kind of a antique shop, curio shop in Herman. And she lived in West St. Louis County, as I recall, and she wanted to have less of a commute and be closer to home. And many of her clients were from the St. Louis area. They'd drive to Herman, and they were always, I guess, saying to her, "Wow, I wish your store was here in the St. Louis area." So she was going to convert this building. And 2 things happened. The city was all in because we thought it was a good location. Because the other property to the south was owned by Warren Strutman, who was selling this property. And the other property was far removed to the north. The house across the street was abandoned, and the water slot single-family subdivision was a good distance removed, and there was a pond and a creek and so forth and so on. But 2 things happened. One, which was expected, the neighborhood to the east came out against it wholeheartedly. But what really, I think, terminated the project was the fire district. They wanted a sprinkler system inside. And there was no public water available, which meant there was a substantial cost to either bring water to the property or to find a tank large enough to meet the gallons per minute that a sprinkler system required. So we had a lot of discussions, we had public input, but we didn't apply it. The other was Mr. Phelan's property down at Centaur Road, at the bend, the 90-degree bend by the railroad. He has all his gas station signs on it, et cetera. Completed it. Mr. Phelan was not sure what he was going to do with it. I could never nail him down. I don't think the Historic Preservation Commission could be either. Talked about an antique store. He talked about just putting some of his stuff in there that he has. But Mr. Phelan is the one that embraces regulations. And so after a while, he said, "I'm not going to use it." So we revoked it. You all revoked it on the recommendation of the department, and the city council concurred. So what's it do? It's an incentive, basically. It can take a property like this with the overlay and allow a non-residential use in a residential area, basically. The scale of the use is always very low intensity and small. It's in the regulations itself. It can't be something that's going to cause a problem in the area. But it's really intended to offer an incentive, a benefit to historic preservation. And it always starts with you. So we have the public hearing with Planning and Zoning Commission. Then, in advance of that, we asked the Historic Preservation Commission for any input. So you have that, just like any other agency comments, so to speak. And you make the decision based upon their input, the commission, Historic Preservation Commission, and what you all use to help you in your decision-making process, experiences, regulations or rules, etc. So that's the LPA. Now, you might be thinking, doggone Wildwood, you can't get anything right. I know we have an LPA. I can't remember one being approved by St. Louis County either. And they have, probably 1,000 or more historic structures and buildings. They have 600,000 residents, and so it's just not something that seems to, I could be wrong, there could be one or two, but the 10 years I was there, I never remember one being acted upon by county council. So it's a good tool, but it's not a tool that's used very much. And what we've done is, instead of LPAs, we offer incentives as part of the register process now, which mutes the need for it to a certain degree. But I would argue, if the Planning and Zoning Commission members were to say, do we even need it, I'd say keep it in here just in case. You never know. It's not harming anyone there, but it's always good to have another alternative to offer when decisions being made about historic asset of significant importance and demolition. So, I want to summarize.
I almost feel like I could see, like that house across from on the west side of 109, across from the BP station up at Wild Horse.
Oh, yeah.
That seems like it'd be a good spot for like an antique store or something.
That was owned by Tom Singer, who got Sand and Guns.
Ah.
He finally sold it, didn't he?
I think
mean,
he
it
did.
took a long time.
Yeah.
Did he not, I know at one point it was for Mr. Roberts was looking to buy it, I don't know.
The
if
two
he-
stories,
The
gray
gray
one. I love that
I
house.
know, it's really cool. Well, they lived there for a while.
Yeah. And this week in the city administrator's update, the city council, MoDOT received grant funding to do a roundabout at Wild Horse Creek Road and Route 109. I don't know how that's going to impact.
Yeah. Can I ask a question, Joe?
Yeah, sure. That's
So-
what we're here for.
Okay, so, and you'll have to forgive my ignorance. So we have, in town center, we have a historic district, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so, does that district make everything in that area historic?
No.
Okay.
So let me explain. I mentioned that, at least in terms of the city's register, there's only one historic district, that's Westland Acre.
Right.
In town center, the Pond Historic District is a land use category.
Oh, okay.
So that's why nothing in there, none of the buildings or structures or land are actually designated historic. It's just a land use category. The rationale being that there is a collection of historically significant structures and buildings in the pond area. And instead of applying new urbanism, the design standards, the architectural guidelines, we needed something different, so we created the Pond Historic District, which basically says you build to the character of the buildings on either side of you, basically. So you maintain what's there instead of something new.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does, yeah.
Okay.
I'm glad I asked.
So still we're at one, Westland Acres, which, again, is a great community. It's a rich history. If you ever get a chance to talk to Doris Fraser, who married Cliff Fraser, who was a descendant of the original founder, like 1832, somewhere around there, a freed slave. Just a great story, wonderful community, Union Baptist Church.
That's off Church Street up there, off Strucker Ram.
The church burned to the ground, it was rebuilt in the 50s, but the historic cemetery is still there. And it's just, like I say, it's a real contemplative place when you get up at the church. Questions? Sorry it took so long. I wasn't intending to talk that much. Was it worth your time?
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Good. I always fear that Travis and I may have picked a sour note, so I'm glad you think. Ms.
I always,
Gragnani,
yeah.
maybe she should say a few things as late as
No, well, I mean, I enjoy being on the Historic Preservation Commission, and I guess one thought that came to my mind this week when I saw that the new owner of Overbrook Farm had done his demolition work, and I guess it brought to my mind the fact that it was kind of, I guess, a balancing act, because the building that he took down to expose the log cabin that was inside of it was also historic. So kind of wonder, you know, did we do the right thing by letting him take down, you know, the original building, and whether there wasn't some way to expose the log cabin on the inside only and, you know, maintain the remainder of the building
Where is
also.
this?
It's on Pond Road.
It's on Pond Road. It shares a common boundary with Pond Athletic Association.
Okay.
So if you're heading, so to speak, north on Pond and you've gone around the circle of Pond Athletic, it's the farm field immediately on your left hand.
Yeah.
You'll now notice big gates there
Gotcha.
to say Overbrook Farm. It's kind of hard to see the log cabin now with the leaves on the trees, but once the leaves are down, it'll be pretty visible.
I understand your statement. A voluntary ordinance,
Right,
There's
we
more.
have, right.
I think day in and day out, there's more losses than wins. You know, we process every structure or building that's 75 years in age or older. The Historic Preservation Commission does a site visit. So we go out there and we do our best to try to convince the owner, this is a bad idea, this is a wonderful building. You know, we do a gentle arm twisting. We take pictures, photographs of it, so we have a document of what it was like prior to demolition. And I guess the biggest thing we do is we always try to repurpose as much of the materials from the demolition, either in the new project, the new home, the new building, or to source them locally, either to the city or to organizations that actually put the materials back into active construction projects. So I think we've had a lot of success, wouldn't you say, Ms. Gardner?
I mean, I would agree with that, and you know, it's like you said, it is very definitely a balancing act, and I can understand, you know, people own the property and they want to be able to do their property. They want to be able to do what they want with it, and you can't, you know, you can't really, I don't think we can really stop them. I think it would be wrong to do that. But it is, I mean, it's hard to watch the building on Old Etherton Road that's falling apart. There's another one on Wild Horse Creek Road that's falling apart, that's within Wildwood. And, you know, I mean, it happened with the, as you said, with the Pond Hotel, and it's, you know, you wish that there was something that could be done to force them to at least maintain the exterior to keep the weather out of the buildings until they decide what they're going to do with it. And, you know, I was glad to see that the new owner of, you know, is doing something at least with that house. I mean, he took it down, but, you know, he's gonna maintain, hopefully he's gonna maintain the log cabin that he has there now. And glad to see that happen and the property be used. rather than just, I was waiting for it to start to fall down, because it had been empty for a long time.
And he did do a true restoration of the large barn on the property.
Right.
Nice.
The gentleman went out and found barn wood from the same time frame. I mean, they did carbon dating a lot of the stuff.
That's
how
very
it-
expensive.
Yeah.
It's really expensive to do.
So,
What's the story with the Cardinals house on
well,
Strucker?
the folks that own, that was always a rental property, although the Cardinals fan was there for decades.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I miss all the signs that she had.
My kids do too, because my kids were little when we used to drive by that every day, and if I failed to honk, I got 3 voices, honk, honk.
But the folks that own the farm fields there
Mhm.
in the valley, they own that residence. And they have talked to the city, on and off for the last couple of years about potentially doing a bed and breakfast.
They're working on it, I mean, I love driving by and watching them work on it.
Yeah, we encourage them. They're trying to stabilize it right now, because I guess the tenant was an older person, and
Yeah.
over time it just kind of deteriorated, but yeah, they talked about a bed and breakfast there, and we've encouraged it, because it's a conditional use in the non-urban. It would be something the Planning and Zoning Commission would ultimately see. And in that case, you would grant the permit if you thought appropriate.
We would have to require that they put Cardinal stuff out though.
Yeah.
Anybody that's lived out here, it's the Cardinal's house.
What's going on with the pond in, the old pond in, that it turns over and turns over and turns over and nobody does anything?
Well, yeah, as you know, it's still closed and vacant.
Mhm.
Southeast corner of Pond in Manchester? Okay.
A little white building.
Yeah.
So.
Looks like it has new windows recently.
Right,
Yeah,
they did some
inside.
renovation.
A lot of changes, a lot of
Yeah.
upgrades, so I'll do it as quickly as I can. So originally Tony Haney owned it,
Mhm.
and his wife was, as I'm told, from France, and it was a French restaurant, 2 seatings on the weekends. And it was supposedly just a wonderful meal to have. They divorced, she went back to France, he closed the restaurant, and so that was the first closure. And he passed. Property was purchased by someone, I'm not sure, and then there was a series of ill-fated restaurants in there.
Mhm.
The last being, I think, a Cajun place that was so mismanaged, we had wastewater out on Christie Road. It was just terrible. So, kind of, then was set vacant, and a lady named Bethany Carr purchased it. She was going to open a restaurant, and that was kind of the first renovation. But before she purchased it, the city made very clear to her that we're not going to have raw sewage on the street again. You need to get either a system that works, or you need to connect to public sewer. She chose the latter and actually had the property and those intervening properties annexed into the Metropolitan St. Louis Sewer District. And what she thought was a $90,000 charge kept increasing. And in that period of time, she divorced her husband, who was funding the project.
So that's 2 divorces there.
Yes.
So don't buy that.
Right.
I think that's the
You wanna
lesson.
stay married.
So, when the money dried up, so did the interest, and so it just sat there, partially exposed. That's when it had the Tyvek still, you could
Right,
see.
right.
It was in bad shape, and I was the doctor, and her husband was a doctor. And he and I met out there on several occasions, and he'd make promises, and he'd do some of it, but not all of it, and it just continued. Then R.L. Jones Properties purchased it, the owner of Wildwood Square. And they want to open it as a restaurant. They had several people interested in it.
I thought Nicoletti's was interesting.
And there was a young couple that, they had a food truck, Frankly Sausages, that was interested in opening a brick and mortar facility. But their problem now is sewer. Same one that has been there for a long time. So as part of the economic development efforts of the city, the Economic Development Committee of the City Council has been talking about doing a neighborhood improvement district to extend sewer, public sewer from basically Pond Elementary School out to Wildwood Middle School. It's $1 million+ project. There's not many property owners, and so the cost is high to them under their assessment. And so it's been kind of going back and forth and back and forth, and so that's why it's kind of sitting there still.
Well, even before the French restaurant was there, it was, I remember in high school, we used to go there and different groups played, bluegrass bands and different groups.
Okay. Well, it used to be the dance hall, I mean, the big hall next to it too.
Went down.
Yeah. I forgot all about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was fun.
Yeah, it could be a great, I mean, you know, there could be a real good synergy out there, I think. It's just, wastewater is a tough issue.
Mm.
It killed the microbrewery and Pond Hotel. It's delaying the reopening of Pond Inn. It's an ongoing problem to a certain degree for Big Chief Roadhouse because they're on a small plant.
Mhm.
You know, it's just a lot of maintenance costs,
Right.
a lot of permitting and paperwork.
So I guess like the church and Living Word and Wildwood Middle are on their own little systems.
Big systems.
Well,
Big
yeah.
system.
They're big plants, actually. And one of the incentives for the neighborhood improvement district I had mentioned earlier is Wildwood Middle School would like to get off their own plant and be on public sewer.
Mhm.
They're one of the major property owners and certainly have deeper pockets, so to speak, than most of the individual businesses or property owners. And the neighborhood improvement district is kind of a crazy thing. You need 50% of the property owners, or the property owners with 50% of the acreage plus something. So you can be brought into a neighborhood improvement district and vote against it because of the way the numbers are set forth in state statute. But the city's kind of hesitant to do that, so.
Well, I learned a lot from this. I'm glad you did this because it, you know, we see these banners and we don't get a chance to kind of really delve into it. So thank you for doing this.
Sure. My pleasure.
Do you think one of the reasons that the people would go on the National Registry and not on the city registry is because there's probably little oversight as to what is done with the property on the National Registry, and they're worried about that not being the case if they're on the local registry?
Well, we do keep an eye on them, more so than probably the federal government. But again, remember I mentioned the federal government, like a lot of programs, defers much of the requirements and enforcement to the state. And there's the State Historic Preservation Office.
But still, I mean, the oversight on that's gonna be minimal.
We're on the National Register. I don't have to fill out any paperwork. And I don't hear from anybody. So it does seem that oversight is somewhat limited. I do want to, one last thing, I'm sorry. The city of Wildwood is what is called a certified local government, a CLG. It is a program that's initiated by the federal government, managed by the state. And what it basically means is if you have a historic preservation commission, if you're excited about historic preservation and restoration, you're at the top of the list for grant funding when it's available. And we have to file an annual report. We put all the minutes of our meetings in there and background of our commission members and the things we've done. We were one of, there's a good group of them now. I can't think how many cities there are, but we were like one of the first. It's something relatively new. We were like the 39th in the state to be part of it. And there's Kansas City and St. Louis are CLGs, and then there's real small towns too. and then we run in between.
So there's a house on Etherton, right up the road from Old Manchester, where they just like totally redid the exterior. I think new windows, new siding, all of that on one of those, a home from probably the 20s, I guess. How does the historic, I mean, I guess that would, would that have been able to happen if that house was on the registry, do you think?
They would have had to get a certificate of appropriateness from the Historic Preservation Commission.
Yeah.
Otherwise, again, with the voluntary ordinance, they could do whatever they wanted. They could paint it pink.
Yeah. It's funny you mention that, because my kids keep asking me if they can paint our house pink without approval.
Talk to your homeowners association first.
Well, and that's what I told them, it's like, Wildwood doesn't have any say over that, the HOA does.
And unfortunately, the HOA has really no teeth in their ability to stop you from doing whatever you want.
Most HOAs have to engage an attorney, and then the attorney writes a letter saying don't do it. And that hopefully that stops it, but if it doesn't, then it's a legal action, which is all expensive.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I can attest to that.
Yeah, we had one that just didn't pay his dues for like 4 or 5 years and then got foreclosed on, and we're still trying to get money out of him.
And you have to file a
You have
lien.
to file a lien.
Why don't you test it, paint it pink, and then report to us?
Right. It's the old story, it's better to say I'm sorry than to ask permission in the first place.
Well, we painted our front door purple. And we got some kudos out of it from a couple of people that bought Craigslist stuff from us.
Good. Well, you know, I can't think of maybe Canberra, you know, all of the detached units are pretty much the same color. And I think that's the one where all the doors are kind of different colors. I think that's where people got to be a little
Creative.
I'll have to pay attention next time I walk out, well, on my ride home, I guess.
Well, I want to thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Hopefully it wasn't too long or too uninteresting, so, but we do appreciate your time.
No,
And
thank you so
hopefully
much.
it Makes us all better for the process.
Do we need a motion?
Move
for-
to adjourn.
Yeah.
Motion for adjournment?
Second.
Everyone in
Aye.
favor?
Aye.
We'll have a good rest of the week, and we'll see you next Monday.